James Hawthorne was used to being in control. As a billionaire CEO, he had built an empire from the ground up. His life was a carefully crafted balance of work, meetings, and high-profile events. But today, on this rare day off, he found himself walking through a quiet park in the heart of the city, hoping to escape the pressures of his world, even if only for an hour. The crisp autumn air, the rustling leaves, and the serenity of the park brought him a rare sense of peace, something he hadn't felt in a long time. As he strolled along the path, lost in thought, his eyes caught sight of a familiar face. At first, he thought he was imagining it, but as he drew closer, his heart skipped a beat. There, sitting on a park bench, was Emma, his ex-wife, the woman who had once been the center of his world, the one he had loved with every fiber of his being, now sitting mere feet away, looking as beautiful as ever. Emma looked up and met his gaze. Her eyes widened in recognition, and for a split second there was a flicker of surprise before her face hardened into a mask of neutrality. James could tell she had been lost in thought as well. But now, the awkwardness of the situation hung thick in the air. "James," she said softly, her voice steady but guarded. "It's been a long time." He nodded, unsure of how to respond. Their divorce had been messy, filled with bitter arguments and unresolved feelings. They had parted ways years ago, with no contact since. The suddenness of their meeting left him at a loss for words. "Yeah, a long time," he said, his voice tight, his mind racing to make sense of the situation. What were the chances of running into her here, of all places? "I never expected to see you here," Emma continued, shifting uncomfortably on the bench. "How have you been?" James shrugged, trying to remain composed. "Busy. Same as always. And you?" She hesitated, her gaze drifting to the ground. "I've been fine. You know, life goes on." The tension between them was palpable. The years of separation, the hurt, the unspoken words, they all hung between them like a heavy fog. They stood there for a moment, unsure of how to proceed, until Emma broke the silence. "Look, I didn't come here to make things awkward," she said with a sigh. "I didn't expect to run into you either, but it's nice to see you. Really." James tried to smile, but it felt forced. "Yeah, it's nice to see you too." As the awkwardness lingered, James noticed something out of the corner of his eye. A small child, no older than 3 or 4, was playing nearby. The child looked up, smiling brightly at Emma, and ran toward her, calling out, "Mommy!" with a gleam of happiness in her eyes. Emma's face softened immediately, and she reached out to scoop the child into her arms. James froze. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. The child's face, with her dark hair and bright eyes, was a reminder of something he couldn't quite place. There was a resemblance. Something about her reminded him of Emma, but more than that, there was something familiar about her features. He blinked, his heart pounding in his chest. "Is this your daughter?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of disbelief. Emma smiled, though it was a little strained. "Yes, her name's Lily." Lily looked up at James with curious eyes. "Hi, mister," she said shyly, waving a tiny hand. James felt a lump form in his throat. He had never imagined Emma with a child, certainly not this little girl, and yet there was something about her that struck him deeply. A wave of emotions swept over him, surprise, confusion, and a rising sense of discomfort that he couldn't quite explain. "She's beautiful," James managed to say, his voice quiet as he watched the little girl snuggle into Emma's arms. "Thank you," Emma said, her gaze softening as she looked down at Lily. "She's the best thing that's happened to me in a long time." But as James stood there, a strange unease began to gnaw at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the shock of seeing Emma with a child, but the nagging sensation that he was missing something important. Why hadn't Emma mentioned her daughter before? Why had she never reached out to him, especially when their marriage had ended? It was all too much to process in a single moment. As they stood in the park, the quiet breeze ruffling their hair, James felt an overwhelming wave of emotions. For a moment, he was transported back in time, to a time when everything had seemed so perfect between him and Emma. He remembered the first time they met, how easy and effortless their love had been. They had been inseparable, partners in life and business, and for years, he had believed that nothing could tear them apart. But time had a way of changing things. As the years went by, cracks had started to form in their relationship. The pressures of James's business, his obsession with success, had driven a wedge between them. Emma had always been the softer, more nurturing one, and slowly she had grown tired of feeling neglected and unimportant in James's world. She had wanted more attention, more love, more partnership, and he had failed to give it to her. When they had divorced, it had been a relief to both of them, but also a profound sadness. Neither of them had wanted to let go, but in the end, it seemed like the only option. They had drifted apart, each of them silently mourning the loss of what could have been. Now, standing before her after all these years, James could still feel the remnants of that lost love. His heart ached as he realized how much he missed the woman who had once been his everything. And yet, there was also a bitterness, a frustration that lingered. How could she have moved on so easily without him? How could she have had a child without him even knowing? James, Emma's voice cut through his thoughts, pulling him back to the present. I didn't expect this, running into you. I've thought about you, of course, but life just moved on, you know? James nodded, his throat tight. Yeah, I get it. Life does move on. The silence between them grew heavy again. The air was filled with unspoken words, regrets, and questions neither of them seemed ready to answer. But as James looked at Emma, he realized that there were things left unsaid, things he needed to understand. This chance encounter, this unexpected reunion, had opened up a whole new set of questions in his mind. And as much as he wanted to walk away and forget about it all, something about this moment, something about the little girl in Emma's arms, made him stay. Is she your only family now? James asked, his voice soft but laden with curiosity. Emma looked down at Lily, her eyes softening. Yes, for now, she replied quietly. But I'm happy. I've found peace in my own way. James nodded again, though his mind was racing. Peace. Could it be possible that Emma had truly found peace without him? He couldn't imagine it. And yet, as he looked at her holding Lily, he couldn't deny the sense of completeness in her expression. She had moved on, and here he was, still stuck in the past. But what about Lily? Who was she really? What was the connection between them that James couldn't shake? James couldn't shake the image of Lily from his mind. Her bright eyes, the way she clung to Emma, her shy smile, it all seemed to haunt him in a way he couldn't explain. He had been caught off guard by the encounter with Emma, but the appearance of the little girl had added a layer of complexity to everything. There was a strange, undeniable pull he felt toward her, something that made him question everything he thought he knew about his past with Emma. As they stood together on the park bench, the conversation dwindled. Emma seemed lost in thought as she gently rocked Lily in her arms, the child quietly mumbling to herself, oblivious to the weight of the moment. James couldn't help but steal glances at them, his curiosity and confusion growing with each passing second. She looks like you, he said, almost absent-mindedly. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Emma looked up, surprised by the observation. I suppose so, she replied, offering a small smile. I've been told she has my eyes. James didn't know why, but the way Emma said it made him feel uneasy. It wasn't just the child's resemblance to her, though that alone was striking. It was something else, something deeper, that tugged at him, as if Lily wasn't just Emma's daughter, but something more, something connected to him in a way he couldn't yet understand. There was a beat of silence before James spoke again. How old is she? 3, Emma answered softly, still looking down at her daughter. She's just turning 3 in a couple of weeks. It's hard to believe how fast time has gone by. James nodded, his mind racing. 3 years. That was right around the time he and Emma had split up. The realization hit him like a sudden jolt of electricity. Could it be possible? Could this little girl, this child with her wide brown eyes and dark hair, actually be his? The thought seemed absurd, yet the more he looked at her, the more it made sense. The timing, the way she resembled Emma, there was something familiar about her that he couldn't ignore. His heart began to race as he opened his mouth to speak again, but Emma beat him to it. I should probably get going, she said, standing up with Lily still in her arms. It's getting late. James quickly took a step forward. Wait, he said, his voice slightly more urgent than he intended. Can we talk for a minute? Alone? Emma hesitated, looking at him with a mix of wariness and curiosity. Talk about what? About Lily, James said, his throat suddenly dry. I need to know more. She blinked, clearly surprised by his request. There's nothing to say, James. She's my daughter. That's all there is to it. But James wasn't convinced. There was something she wasn't telling him, something important. The way Emma had mentioned Lily so casually, as though the child's presence wasn't a huge revelation. It made James more certain than ever that there was more to this story. If Lily was his daughter, then that was something he needed to know. "I don't mean to be intrusive," James began, his voice low and careful, "but is she mine?" Emma froze. For a moment, she didn't move, her eyes locked on his. The silence stretched between them like a thick fog. Then, with a deep sigh, she gently set Lily back down on the bench, the child happily playing with a small toy she had picked up from the ground. Emma took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her jacket. "I wasn't sure how to tell you," she admitted quietly. "I didn't know how to say it, especially after everything that happened." James's heart clenched at her words. "Tell me what?" Emma finally looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of regret and sadness. "Lily is yours, James. She's your daughter." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His mind went blank for a moment as he tried to process what Emma had just said. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His whole body felt like it was suspended in time. His daughter? He had a daughter? How could he have been kept in the dark for all these years? Emma seemed to sense his shock and quickly stepped forward, placing a hand on his arm. "James?" He pulled back, his mind swirling with emotions he couldn't control. Anger, confusion, disbelief. He felt them all at once. "Why didn't you tell me? All these years. Why keep this from me?" Emma's face softened, and her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know how to. I didn't want you to feel burdened by this. You had moved on. You had your own life. I thought maybe it was better if you never knew." James's chest tightened, the weight of her words crashing down on him. He could feel the years of pain and silence that had built up between them, the walls that had grown higher with every passing day. But this was different. This was something he couldn't ignore. For a long moment, James stood there, processing the information. He looked down at Lily, who was now giggling as she played with the toy in her lap, oblivious to the emotional turmoil swirling around them. His daughter. It was surreal. How had he not known? "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma wiped her eyes, looking away for a moment before meeting his gaze again. "I was scared. Scared of what you'd think. Scared you'd reject her, or worse, reject me. I didn't want to put either of us through that." James felt his heart soften at her words, but the anger still simmered beneath the surface. He didn't know how to reconcile his feelings. How could he forgive her for keeping this from him? And yet, there was something else, something he couldn't deny. There was a connection between him and this child. He could see it now, even if he hadn't recognized it before. Lily was his daughter. And that fact, more than anything else, made everything feel so much more complicated. James's mind was a storm of emotions as he stood in the park with Emma. The shock of learning that Lily was his daughter was only the beginning. His thoughts raced as he tried to make sense of everything. His failed marriage, the sudden appearance of Lily, and the years of silence that had passed between him and Emma. There were so many questions he needed answers to, but he wasn't sure where to start. The silence between them felt heavy now, charged with the weight of what had just been revealed. James couldn't bring himself to look at Emma for long. He could see the regret in her eyes, but it didn't diminish the confusion he felt. How could she have kept this from him? How could she have raised his daughter without even telling him? I don't know what to say," James finally said, his voice cracking slightly. He ran a hand through his hair, his mind still reeling. "How could you hide something like this from me?" Emma took a deep breath, her voice shaking. "I never meant for it to be this way. I thought I was doing the right thing, but now I see that I made a mistake. I should have told you sooner." James's fists clenched at his sides as frustration bubbled up inside him. "A mistake? Emma, this isn't just a mistake. This is my daughter we're talking about. You kept her from me for years, and I had no idea she even existed." The words were out before he could stop them, and he immediately regretted the harshness in his tone. Emma flinched, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she stood her ground, her expression pained but resolute. "I know," she whispered, "and I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope you can understand why I did it." James took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. There was so much anger inside him, but there was something else too, something that pulled at him, hate, a deep longing for answers. He needed to know everything, the full story, the reasons behind Emma's decisions, behind the years of silence. I need to know everything, Emma, he said quietly, his voice more controlled now. I need to know why you kept this from me, why you didn't tell me I had a daughter. Emma nodded slowly, looking down at Lily, who was now playing with a leaf on the ground. The little girl looked up at them both with innocent curiosity, her presence reminding them of the bond they shared, the bond that James had never known about until now. Come on, Emma said softly. Let's sit down. There's a lot I need to tell you. James nodded, his heart heavy but determined. He needed answers. And this time, he was going to get them. They found a quiet bench near the edge of the park, away from the bustle of the city. The rustling leaves above them seemed to echo the tension in the air, each breeze stirring the emotions between them. Emma sat down first, gently pulling Lily into her lap, the little girl contentedly holding a colorful toy in her hands. James, on the other hand, stood for a moment, his thoughts swirling in a chaotic storm before sitting beside Emma, though a safe distance away. The weight of everything hung heavily between them. There were so many questions, so many emotions, but for once James found himself at a loss for words. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before Emma spoke. I know this is overwhelming, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't look at him immediately, instead focusing on Lily, who was happily playing with her toy. But I need you to understand why I did what I did. I was scared, James. Scared of what you'd think, scared of losing her, and scared of you. James turned toward her, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never seen Emma like this before, so vulnerable, so raw. For a long time, he had seen her as strong, independent, the woman who had been his partner in everything. But now there was a new side to her, one that carried the weight of years of decisions and the burden of silence. Scared of me? James repeated, his voice low with a mix of confusion and frustration. Emma, we were married. I was your husband. Why would you be scared of me? And why didn't you tell me about Lily? She took a deep breath, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I didn't want to drag you back into my life, especially after everything that happened between us. You were already so focused on your business, so entrenched in your world. I didn't think you'd want to be a part of hers. James's chest tightened as he processed her words. He couldn't deny that their marriage had been tumultuous toward the end. He had been too focused on his career, too distant from the woman he had once loved. But this was different. This was their daughter, and he had missed out on all of it. You should have told me, James said, his voice strained with emotion. You shouldn't have made that decision alone. I know, Emma whispered. I regret it every day, but it's done now. And Lily is here with us. That's all that matters now. James's mind raced. The questions flooded in, one after another. How had he never noticed the signs? Had Emma hidden her pregnancy from him? Why hadn't he ever thought to ask? The answers seemed just beyond his reach, like fragments of a puzzle scattered around him. He wanted to understand, but part of him wasn't sure he ever could. And you never once thought to reach out to me? James asked, his voice softer now, the pain seeping through. Never once gave me the chance to be a father to her? Emma's gaze softened, and she looked away for a moment, as if the weight of the years and the decision she had made was too much to bear. I thought about it, every single day. But I kept thinking you'd be better off without me. And without her. James felt a sharp pang in his chest. He had loved Emma with everything he had once, but her words now felt like a dagger to his heart. It was as if she had written him out of their lives, thinking he would never care, that he would never want to be part of this, part of her life, or their daughter's. I don't want to be better off without you, James said, his voice barely audible, but full of a depth he hadn't expected to hear from himself. I don't know how, but I want to make up for lost time. I want to be a father to her. Emma met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and doubt. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, Lily looked up at them both, her face lighting up with a bright smile. Mommy, I see the duckies, she exclaimed, pointing at a small pond nearby. The innocence of her joy seemed to momentarily break the tension between them, and both Emma and James turned to look at the little girl, their hearts softening. Emma chuckled softly, wiping away a tear from her eye. She's always loved the ducks. They're her favorite. James smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. He was still reeling from everything he had just learned, but seeing the child in Emma's arms, so carefree and innocent, brought a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward. Maybe this wasn't the end of the road, but the beginning of something new. But as he looked at Lily, there was still one question that lingered in the back of his mind, something that hadn't been addressed yet. How did you know she was mine? James asked, his voice trembling with uncertainty. I mean, we weren't together when you had her. How could you be so sure? Emma hesitated, her fingers nervously running over the fabric of her jacket. She took a deep breath, her eyes locking onto his. There's something I've been meaning to tell you, James, she said, her voice quiet but urgent. Something I should have told you from the very beginning. But I didn't know how. James's heart rate picked up again as he braced himself for whatever Emma was about to reveal. He had never been one to shy away from the truth, but whatever this was, it felt like it could change everything. I didn't just keep her from you because of my own fears, Emma continued, her voice wavering. I kept her from you because I wasn't sure if you'd ever believe she was yours. James's brow furrowed in confusion. What do you mean? Emma looked down at Lily, her eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to run deep. I'm not the only one who's been keeping secrets, James. There's something about Lily, something I didn't tell you then, and I'm sorry for it now. But she isn't just your daughter, she's also your sister's. James's world stopped. He blinked, his breath caught in his throat. His sister? The words felt like they had come from another universe, as if his mind was failing to process the magnitude of what Emma had just said. My sister, he whispered, his voice trembling. Emma nodded slowly. Yes, Lily's father was your brother. The silence between them was deafening. James felt as if the ground beneath him had been ripped away. He stared at Emma, his mind struggling to piece together what she had just revealed. His brother? His own flesh and blood? The words spun in his head, making it impossible to focus on anything else. How could that be? He stammered, the confusion in his voice palpable. Emma looked at him with sorrow in her eyes, but there was no turning back now. I didn't want to tell you because I knew how it would sound, how it would make everything worse. But you deserve to know the truth. Lily's father is your brother, Thomas. James's heart pounded in his chest as his mind struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what Emma was saying. His brother Thomas had been involved with Emma? And that meant his daughter, the little girl who he had just learned was his, was also his niece? The realization hit him like a tidal wave, overwhelming him with a rush of emotions. Anger, betrayal, confusion. He couldn't seem to sort them all out. His brother, the man who had been close to him for years, the one he trusted implicitly, had betrayed him in a way he couldn't fathom. And now, this child, his daughter, but also his niece, was caught in the middle of a twisted family secret. Why didn't you tell me sooner? James demanded, his voice rising with the rawness of his pain. Why wait until now? Emma shook her head, her eyes filled with regret. Because I was trying to protect you, protect all of us. It's complicated, James. It wasn't just about you and me. It was about what this would do to our family. James's chest tightened. This revelation was more than he could handle in one moment. He had lost so much already, and now this? The world as he knew it had been turned upside down, and he wasn't sure how he was supposed to pick up the pieces. But as he looked down at Lily, his daughter, her bright eyes and innocent smile somehow grounding him, he realized something. No matter how twisted the past had been, no matter how shattered their family had become, he couldn't ignore her. She was his flesh and blood. And for the first time in years, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, to protect her, to understand her, and to make sure she knew she was loved. He turned to Emma, his expression softening. We'll figure this out, he said, though he wasn't sure what that meant. We have to figure this out, for Lily. Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll do whatever it takes. For her. For you. And so, with a new chapter unfolding before them, James found himself facing the most complicated and heartbreaking choice of his life. But this time, he wasn't going to face it alone. The tension between James and Emma seemed to hang in the air, the weight of the truth too heavy for either of them to fully comprehend. Yet, as they sat together in that quiet park, something shifted. James couldn't deny that the truth had shattered everything he once knew, but it had also opened a door to something he hadn't expected. The chance to rebuild, to find some sense of normalcy in a world that had turned upside down. And it all started with Lily. He looked down at the little girl in Emma's arms, her innocent face looking up at him with wide, trusting eyes. In that moment, James understood something deeper than the betrayal of family or the pain of lost time. He understood what it meant to be a father, to protect, to love, to provide. He wasn't going to let this revelation destroy him or his future with Lily. But there was still so much to be done. The secrets Emma had kept, the lies they had lived, the complexities of their shared past. All of it needed to be addressed. The truth about Lily's parentage wasn't just something that would affect him and Emma. It was something that would tear apart his family, his parents, his brother's legacy, and the entire dynamic of the world he had known. And James knew, deep down, that the next step would not be easy. There would be a confrontation, one that would change everything. He glanced at Emma, her face weary but determined, and spoke softly. "We need to go to my parents. They need to know." Emma looked back at him, hesitation in her eyes. "I don't know if that's a good idea yet. You don't understand, James. If they find out about Thomas and about Lily, they might not take it well. It could destroy your family." "I don't care about their reaction," James responded firmly. "What matters is that Lily deserves the truth, and she deserves to know her family, all of it. I'm not going to let her grow up with secrets anymore." Emma sighed, clearly torn. "You're right. I don't want to make things worse. I never meant for this to get so complicated." James reached over, taking her hand in his. "We can't change the past, but we can change the future. For her." After a long pause, Emma nodded. "Okay, let's go. For Lily." Together, they made their way to his family's mansion, the weight of what they were about to do pressing heavily on their shoulders. The drive was silent, save for the occasional sound of Lily's soft giggles in the back seat. James tried to keep his focus, trying to sort through all the emotions swirling in his head. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. His family had to know the truth. As they pulled up to the grand house, James could feel the tension in his chest tighten. He had spent his whole life in this mansion, growing up in its grand halls and marble floors. It was supposed to be a symbol of everything he had worked for, everything he had achieved. But now, it felt like a prison. The walls seemed to close in on him as he imagined the confrontation ahead. Emma followed him closely as they entered the house, their steps echoing in the massive foyer. His parents were in the living room, as expected, and both looked up in surprise when they saw James and Emma enter with Lily. His mother, a graceful woman in her late 50s, immediately stood, her face softening in warmth at the sight of her grandson. But her smile faltered when she saw the serious expressions on their faces. "James, Emma, what's going on?" his father, Richard, asked, his voice thick with concern. Richard Whitmore was a man of influence, his presence commanding respect from everyone around him. But now there was a trace of worry in his eyes as he looked between them. James took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settling in. He stepped forward, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "There's something we need to tell you. Something about Lily." His mother's eyes softened, and she smiled at the child in Emma's arms. "She's grown so much, hasn't she? It's hard to believe how quickly time passes." But James cut her off, his voice firmer now. "Mom, Dad, it's not just about how much she's grown. There's something you need to know about Lily, something you don't know." Richard frowned, a look of confusion crossing his face. "What do you mean, son?" Emma took a step forward, her voice shaking as she spoke. "It's about Thomas, about what happened before." The room fell into a heavy silence, the air thick with the implications of what they were about to reveal. James could feel the tension building in the room, his mother's expression hardening as she registered the gravity of Emma's words. "Emma," his mother started, her voice cold. "What are you saying?" Emma swallowed, her hand gripping Lily tighter. "I'm saying that Thomas is Lily's father, and that means James is her uncle, but also her father." The words hit like a bomb, and for a moment, no one spoke. Richard stood frozen, his eyes wide, while his mother slowly sank into the nearest chair, her face pale as the weight of Emma's words settled over her. James felt as if the ground beneath him had given way. His mother's shocked expression mirrored the disbelief he felt inside. "What are you talking about?" Richard demanded, his voice harsh. "This is ridiculous." "I know it's hard to believe," James said, his voice tight, "but it's the truth. Emma kept Lily from me because she didn't want to hurt me. But now that I know, there's no going back." His mother stood, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't understand, James. Why didn't you tell us sooner, Emma? Why keep this secret for so long?" Emma's face crumpled, guilt and sorrow flooding her features. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to explain everything. Thomas's involvement, the way things ended between us. I was scared of losing all of you, and most of all, I was scared of what it would do to James." Richard's face had turned red, his temper flaring. "This is madness. Do you understand what this means for our family?" "Of course I understand." James shot back, his voice rising in frustration. "But we can't change it. Lily is my daughter, and that means she's part of this family. And whether you accept it or not, she's here to stay." The silence in the room was suffocating. His mother looked at James, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "What do you want us to do now?" James took a deep breath. "I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm not turning my back on Lily. I won't leave her out of this family. She's my responsibility now." His mother nodded slowly, her face softening with resignation. "You're right. This is your decision, James, but we can't just pretend like everything is normal. There will be consequences." James felt a pang of guilt, but he knew there was no going back. His family might never be the same, but he had made his choice, for Lily, for the truth, and for himself. The days following the family confrontation were a whirlwind of emotions. James had expected his family to react strongly, but he hadn't prepared for how deeply the revelation about Thomas and Lily would cut. His parents, though they had eventually accepted the truth, had withdrawn from him in ways he hadn't anticipated. His father, always the rational one, had spent days in his study, brooding over the implications of the situation. His mother, on the other hand, had tried to maintain her composure, but it was clear that the revelation had shaken her to the core. Emma, too, was dealing with her own emotions. The guilt of keeping such a monumental secret for so long weighed heavily on her, but she was also determined to move forward, for Lily. She and James had spent hours talking about their past, about Thomas, about their shared responsibility for the child they both now loved. Emma knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was willing to walk it with James. And through it all, Lily remained their constant. Her innocent laughter and boundless energy were a reminder of what really mattered. She was a bridge between them, a symbol of both their past and their future. James knew that their family would never be the same, but he was starting to see that perhaps this was an opportunity to rebuild, to forge something new, something stronger. And this time, it would be built on truth, love, and the unbreakable bond he now shared with Lily. But as he looked into the future, James knew there were still many challenges to face. The truth had set them on a new path, but it would take time, patience, and unwavering commitment to repair the damage that had been done. For now, though, all he could do was hold on to the hope that together they could rebuild what had been lost. The weeks following the family confrontation were filled with strained conversations, silent dinners, and tense meetings. James had always been the family's golden child, the one they could rely on for stability, for leadership, for grace under pressure. But now, as he walked through the grand hallways of his family's mansion, he felt like an outsider in his own life. His father had barely spoken to him since the revelation about Lily. Richard had always valued control, order, and the appearance of perfection. The family's public image was everything, and now that image was shattered. But what hurt the most was that his father's anger was not just about Lily's parentage. It was about the damage to the Whitmore legacy, something Richard had worked his entire life to build. James could see the coldness in his eyes every time they met. His mother, though kinder in her words, had also pulled away. She loved James dearly, but the truth about Thomas and Lily had created an emotional rift that was impossible to ignore. She would smile at him, but there was an air of uncertainty about her. an unspoken question in her gaze, as if she were waiting for something, waiting for him to fix the family. Emma, too, had her own battles to fight. While James struggled with his family, she wrestled with her own guilt and fear. She had never expected this level of fallout when she had made the decision to keep Lily's paternity a secret. She thought she was protecting everyone, but now she saw the cracks that ran deep. She had never been accepted into the Whitmore family in the same way James had been. And now, with Lily's existence unearthing old wounds, Emma was forced to question whether the family she had hoped to belong to would ever truly accept her. But in the quiet moments, when Emma and James were alone with Lily, there was clarity. The love they shared for the little girl who had brought them back together was undeniable, and in her eyes, they saw everything they needed: hope. "I don't care what anyone says," Emma would whisper to James late at night. "We're doing the right thing. For her." James would nod, but his thoughts were always elsewhere, on the future, on what was coming next. It wasn't enough to just have the truth now. They had to fight for acceptance. He knew his family, and he knew the obstacles they would face. His father wouldn't easily accept the truth about Lily, especially with the bitter history of his late brother Thomas still hanging over the Whitmore name. Richard would fight tooth and nail to protect his legacy, and that meant Lily, and by extension Emma and James, would be a threat to that image. James had to make a decision. Would he continue to allow his family to rule his life, to dictate his choices, or would he fight for the future he knew he could build? He realized, with a growing sense of urgency, that his choice was more than about Lily. It was about him. It was about freedom. Freedom from the chains of his family's expectations. Freedom to define what truly mattered. With a newfound resolve, James began to take steps to separate himself from his family's influence. He called a meeting with his father, a rare, almost unheard of move, and sat down in the study where so many business decisions had been made, where his future had once been carved out for him. "You've been quiet for a while now," Richard said, his tone clipped, eyes steely. "What's this about, James?" "I'm not here for a lecture, Dad," James began, his voice steady but firm. "I'm here because I need to make a decision about my future, and I'm not going to let your disappointment or your expectations influence it any longer." Richard's brow furrowed, clearly not expecting such directness from his son. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I've made my choice," James replied, locking eyes with his father. "Lily is my daughter, and she will be raised with all the love and support she deserves. If that means walking away from the Whitmore name and legacy, then I'll do it, because I'm not living my life for anyone but her." The silence in the room stretched for what felt like eternity. Richard's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. James could feel the tension radiating from his father, but he stood his ground, his decision unwavering. "I thought I raised you better than this," Richard finally said, his voice thick with hurt. "To throw away everything we've built for what? A child you barely know?" James's heart pounded in his chest, but his voice remained calm. "I don't care about the name, Dad. I care about the people I love, and I won't let anything come between me and Lily." Richard stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, in a quiet, almost defeated tone, he spoke. "This is your life, James. But don't expect me to just accept this overnight." James nodded. "I don't expect you to, but I'm done trying to live up to your expectations. I'll live for myself now, for her." With that, he stood and walked out of the room, leaving his father staring at the empty space he had just vacated. The days following the confrontation with his father were filled with change. James had made his decision, and he was no longer looking back. He was building a future for himself and Lily, a future where they could live without the weight of family expectations hanging over them. Emma had been by his side through it all, and together they started the process of rebuilding their lives. James had taken control of his own business affairs, stepping away from the Whitmore legacy to establish his own identity, separate from the shadows of his family's wealth and reputation. It wasn't easy, but with each passing day, they grew closer. The love between James and Emma deepened as they navigated the complexities of parenthood together. James began to see the world differently. No longer bound by the golden chains of his family's expectations, he found freedom in his choices. He found joy in being a father to Lily, in seeing her take her first steps, hear her first words, and witness the wonder in her eyes as she explored the world around her. And, slowly but surely, his relationship with Emma blossomed as well. Their shared experience of raising Lily together forged an unbreakable bond between them. They didn't need anyone else's approval. They had each other, and that was enough. As the months passed, James started to see glimmers of hope for a future he could call his own. His family, though still distant, began to accept the reality of his choices. His mother, ever the peacemaker, began to soften toward him, offering her help and support in small but meaningful ways. And while his father still didn't fully accept Lily, James knew it was only a matter of time. One step at a time, they were all healing. In the end, it wasn't the Whitmore name that defined him. It was his actions, his heart, and his love for Lily. He had learned that family wasn't just about blood. It was about those who stood by you when everything else crumbled. And James had found his family in Emma and Lily. They were all he needed to create a new legacy. A legacy built not on wealth or power, but on love, understanding, and the unwavering commitment to protect the ones you cherish. And in that, James found peace. The future was theirs to shape, and they would shape it together. Years passed, and the Whitmore legacy, once defined by wealth and power, was reshaped by love, resilience, and the choices James had made. He had long since walked away from the shadows of his family's expectations, carving out a life that was his own. The mansion that had once felt like a prison had been transformed into a home, filled with laughter, joy, and the warmth of a family that no longer needed to conform to society's ideals. James, Emma, and Lily had built a life rooted in honesty, trust, and an unbreakable bond. They traveled the world together, creating memories that filled the pages of their story, and with each new chapter, they grew stronger as a family. James had become a father in every sense of the word, not just to Lily, but to the life they had built together. He was no longer just the man his family had expected him to be. He was a man who had chosen love over legacy, truth over expectations, and his daughter above all else. Emma, too, had found her place beside him, not as someone who had to prove her worth to the world, but as an equal, a partner, a mother, and a woman who had found her strength in the love they shared. She had risen above the fear and guilt that had once held her back, and in doing so, she had helped create a family built not on secrets, but on transparency and trust. Lily, now a young girl with her own dreams and ambitions, was the light that guided them all. She had grown up in a world where love was her foundation, where acceptance and understanding were the pillars that held everything together. And, though she would never know the complexities of the journey that had brought her here, she would always know the depth of the love that had shaped her life. As James stood with Emma on the balcony of their home, looking out at the sunset, he realized that this was the life he had always wanted, a life not dictated by his family's expectations, but by his own choices. The past had shaped him, but it did not define him. It was the present, the love he shared with Emma and Lily, that truly mattered. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, James felt at peace. He had found everything he needed in the family he had built, and he knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, stronger than ever, united by love, and ready to write the next chapter of their story. The legacy James had forged wasn't one of wealth or power. It was a legacy of love. And that, he realized, was the greatest gift he could ever give. Thank you so much for following this story to its end. We truly appreciate you taking the time to listen and watch every part unfold. It's been an incredible journey of love, decisions, and family, and we're so glad you are here to experience it with us. If you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us bring you more content that you love. Stay tuned for more stories, and we look forward to having you with us for the next adventure. Once again, thank you for your time and for being part of this journey. See you next time.